we want people to be able to improve their lives. And the more that we as a society can equip and empower people to improve their lives rather than have people from the top down decide for them how to do so, the better off everyone's going to be. And that is both true, as it turns out, and is why I became so passionate about the community overall in how to run a successful business and how to build a more prosperous society.
Welcome back to another episode of Good Work. My name is Barrett Brooks. I'm your host. And this is a podcast made up of long-form conversations about how to live a meaningful life, how to make an impact with your work, and ultimately, how to change the world through the life that you live. My guest today is my friend Kevin Lavelle. Kevin is the founder, former CEO, and current chairman of a company called Mizzen+Main. They were the first company to make performance fabric dress shirts. Think dry fit technology from Nike meets the style of Ralph Lauren, as Kevin talks about it. That was his original vision, was what if Nike and Ralph Lauren had a baby as brands? And everyone called him absolutely nuts when he started it. And he proved them all wrong. He built Mizzen+Main into an incredible, sustainable company that has shipped probably hundreds of thousands of shirts around the country and around the world at this point. And in 2021, after years at the helm of the company, he realized, I think that I've done what I set out to do here, and I would rather leave on a high note than wait until I've outkicked my coverage in terms of what I'm able to do as a CEO. So he went out and hired a professional, highly experienced CEO to take over. He moved into a role as chairman, and he moved on to a role at a nonprofit called Stand Together. Now, if you've not heard of Stand Together, or if you have, it's worth it to state that it's funded by Charles Koch. He's one of the Koch brothers, and basically, regardless of where you fall in the political spectrum, when you hear a Koch brothers name, you probably have a default view of what that means about the person that's involved. And I wanted to talk to Kevin about that. And what I found was that there was a lot of depth and meaning that Kevin made of his work with that organization, of being involved in that network, and the principles that underlie it. And even if we can disagree on the solutions that come out of the principles someone forms, I really respect the way that Kevin communicated why it mattered to him and how he found a group of people whose beliefs he shared and was able to grow into himself both as a leader and as a thinker by being a part of that organization. We also talk about his background working as a management consultant and in the Middle East early in his career and how that shaped his views. And then lastly, we get into his newest company, which is called Harbor. It is a baby monitor. They make hardware, a camera, and a tablet. And it's both Wi-Fi enabled and operates even when your Wi-Fi goes out through a local network. They've got a vision that's much bigger than just a baby monitor, but it starts with the hardware, and he's right in the thick of getting that thing off the ground and getting it out into the world. They were recently reviewed by Wired as one of the top baby monitors, especially for people who really want peace of mind for their kids. So as a dad of young kids, that really resonates with me. And I helped fill out a bunch of surveys and customer research things for Kevin in the early days. It's exciting to see how far it's come already. So I talked to Kevin about what it's like to be a multi-time entrepreneur, how he became the kind of leader capable of building deeply meaningful companies where people love going to work, and why he decided to go back at it a second time when he had been through it once before. So I think you're going to really enjoy this one, especially if you're an entrepreneur. Let's get to it. Kevin Lavelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Derek. It's good to reconnect here.
Great to reconnect. I won't do the whole backstory because the audience doesn't really care. We've known each other a long time. I'll leave it at that. I always try and start with a little bit of a fun and lighthearted story or idea for my guest. And I was reading some of your past writing, of which there's not copious amounts, but there's enough to kind of like get a feel for things. And in one of those posts about leaving Mizzen+Main, which we'll get to, you talked about a wonderful Valentine's Day gift you gave to your wife in 2013. I wondered if you might start with telling the story of this Valentine's Day gift back then.
I'm pretty sure this is it. It was when I gave her a storage unit for Mizzen+Main's inventory, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. The very relevant genesis of this was when we got married. It was on our honeymoon that I sort of said, I'm really going to go make this Mizzen+Main thing happen. So we got married in April of 2012. Mizzen+Main launched in July of 2012. And we joke all the time that my wife didn't sign up to be married to an entrepreneur. And all of our friends who are entrepreneurs, their spouses, it's like a support club because of what spouses have to deal with entrepreneurs. Whether it's the husband supporting the wife or the wife supporting the husband, doesn't matter. The humorous aspect of this was, when you start a business, you don't have any money for a long time. And the thing that I thought would be the greatest gift I could give Jen was getting all of the Mizzen+Main inventory out of our house. Not just because our house smelled like cardboard, but also we lived in a small little bungalow house, and the only place to store the inventory was in our bedroom. And the way our bedroom was configured, it was on her side of the bed. So like she had just enough room to get out of the bed and walk around. I wasn't being selfish. There was no way to put it on my side of the room. So regularly she would slam into boxes that were floor to ceiling. And so I promised her for Valentine's Day that I would get all the inventory out of the house. And that felt like a really big step for us at the time. And now looking back on that, it's even more humorous to remember it. Obviously, I had to confirm that was it because I haven't thought about that in a long time. But we've been very happily married for 12 years now.
Yeah. No, I love it. It's so emblematic of many things we'll get into, but primarily the entrepreneurial journey and just the things required of you when you're starting up and getting things going, and having things stacked floor to ceiling in your bedroom is just one of those things that happens on the journey of starting a company like Mizzen+Main. There's many places I want to go from here, but I thought maybe we might go back and get a little bit of the backstory about how you ended up there, because you're no longer at Mizzen+Main in the same capacity. You are still chairman and very involved, but you're no longer CEO. But before all of that, the person your wife married was a management consultant, I think, right? Or maybe a banking analyst or something like that.
Yeah, close enough. I was a management consultant for a few years, and then I worked as an investment analyst in an energy company.
Okay.
A guy who worked with spreadsheets and had a very stable income. Yes.
Yeah. Which is a very different thing from a person starting a performance fabric dress shirt company.
Yes.
And as a part of working as a management consultant, you got this opportunity to go and spend some time in the Middle East. And I was really fascinated by that because I don't think anyone that's been on the show so far has spent time where you spent time for that length, and certainly not worked there. And you talked a little bit about this in public of how it shaped you, but I was just curious kind of how that experience shaped your views of the world, of your work, generally of how it shaped your path up to now.
So a couple of things stand out for me in that experience. And one of the very relevant kind of points that got me there was my sister received a full scholarship to SMU. It put it on my radar. I also received a full scholarship to SMU, and that made that decision very easy for me. But part of it was, and it was really compelling, was a full year abroad as a part of the scholarship. And so she studied abroad, I studied abroad, and I loved that experience of seeing the world. Now, in hindsight, I saw a very sanitized view of the world because I was in Spain, England, and Australia. Now, in Australia, I also did a month-long study tour through Southeast Asia. And so that was a little bit more different. But like when Americans go to Western Europe, it's not like we've really seen the world. However, it is still much more eye-opening than just living in Florida and Texas, where I had been before. But I wanted more of that. I wanted to get more experience. And I've always been more of an experience person than a thing person. And so one of the, in my view, best jobs that one can get, and certainly for me out of school, was as a management consultant, because you get this broad exposure. You get to work with brilliant people, solve lots of other problems. And some of the best management consulting firms do work all over the world. And so I got hired by a firm called Oliver Wyman. Fast forward over some details. My starting city ended up being in Dubai. And I went over there. I lived in Dubai. We had 130 people in our office from 34 different countries. And I bought some books about working in the Middle East and working in Dubai. And as it turns out, working in Dubai is much more kind of westernized and standardized than a lot of the rest of the Middle East. But one of the first projects I was staffed on was in Saudi Arabia. I flew into Riyadh, from Dubai to Riyadh, every week. And the very first flight that I think I was on in the Middle East, other than landing in Dubai, was the Saudi Arabian airline. I think it's called Al Arabiya, I think. And there's a call to prayer as you're going out to the runway. And that was just such we are recording this on September 11th. As a kid who grew up with that being such a formidable experience, being on a plane in the Middle East, hearing the call to prayer, it's not as if I was scared. It was more just God, the world does not operate in the framework that I think it does. I am but a speck in this massive world experience, because for everyone that lives there, that's just normal for them. And so it was one of the biggest experiences I had there was how not normal my life is. And I don't cast aspersions on being an American or say that our way is wrong. It was just the mind expanding experience of seeing how other people live beyond even just, the Western Europe comparison. That is one very, stark memory about what it was like being there. The second was, I think I'd been there for, I don't know, a week or two. And there was a partner who'd spent most of his professional life consulting all over the world, but a lot in the Middle East. And he was kind of coaching us and giving us some feedback. And he said, you should go to Vu's Bar in the Dubai International Financial Center. There are these beautiful skyscrapers there. They're mirror images of each other. And at the top of one of them, it's called Vu's Bar. I think it's the US bar. And he said, you got to go because it's like being in the bar scene from Star Wars. You go in there and, in the bar scene from Star Wars, there's all these creatures from all over the galaxy and everyone's just sort of doing their own thing. And a bunch of us were like, we have to go. I have to experience that. So we went, and you walk in there and you have professionals from all over the Middle East. So you've got Russian oligarchs, you've got Brazilian, petro lords, it was a mind blowing experience from seeing all these people from all over the world. But what was really interesting was everyone that was there was all about business and building. Doing, right? It was everyone that comes to Dubai, which as it turns out is most of the people that are there on any given day, are there to try to build. Now you could argue some of them are building not in the right way, or you could dispute that, but everyone that's there is there for action. They're there to build. They want to create money, jobs, power, all of that. So it's a very motivating place to be. And that is also exploitative because you have transient labor that is nearly indentured servants, that you've got plane loads of workers from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and those are all the construction workers. And then you have all the kind of service workers from Southeast Asia. And you hear these reports of like their passports are taken, they're sending nearly all their money back home. But at the same time, there's this, you kind of look around and you're like, they are supporting 10 of their family members. And most of them know exactly what they're getting into, and it's the best hope that they have to provide for their loved ones. So there were so many conflicting, again, eye-opening experiences of like, I really don't like that, but I also wouldn't want to not allow them to be there. And it was, if nothing else, one of the greatest examples of like, life is not black and white. It is not clearly yes or clearly no in a lot of areas of life. And then the last thing I would say, just sort of framing up that experience overall, was how much fun it was to be with so many young professionals that all we wanted to do was experience, meet people, travel. Like we all worked our asses off. We all learned a lot. And it was this, meat grinder in the best way because we were working so much, but we got to do so many cool things. And it was just such a privilege to be able to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really fascinating. There's so much there. Maybe we'll come back to some of the nuance around things like labor, immigration, and some of this other stuff where there's just so much nuance. I put myself in the shoes of, someone who's coming to work there in Dubai. And if I were in their circumstances, would I make the same choice? It's an interesting thought exercise to do. I do that sometimes when I think about Nicaraguan immigrants coming up to the US right now. And would I leave there right now and come here? And that is a separate issue from what should the policy of the United States be, And so I just think there's a lot of these mental exercises that are really useful because it does reveal the lack of obvious answers in many different directions and how really it comes down to trade-offs on so many of these things. But more broadly, I can just imagine the ways in which that shapes the young mind, the young professional mind of having these kinds of experiences where, there's another version of it. Like I was a management consultant for a year. And I got to travel a little bit for about the first 3 months pitching business, but that was in Chicago and Cleveland and in the US. And then I got staffed on a Fortune 5 company right outside of Atlanta where I was from. That is a completely different experience of my first year working. But I think there's also something to be said to your point of like that meat grinder experience is valuable. We villainize it in a lot of ways, but especially at that stage of life, for me at least, I know it gave me a great sense of work ethic. It was a kind of a way, like I grew up so much doing manual labor and owning a lawn business and all these different things where like literal hard work got you places. And then this was the example of doing literal hard mind work and not getting you places, and that being what was valued. And I'm very glad I did that. It gave me a completely different perspective of work as I grew in my career. It's like, look, building startups is hard. There's another version of my career where I was in the office until 1 a.m. just waiting on the partner to get done with some other meeting so he could give us feedback on the slides so we could do another version of this deck we were about to present the next day. And that's a different kind of hard. So I can appreciate that a bunch. But one of the things that I heard you talk about related to this time was you also get to travel in the region, right? You went to Beirut, you went to Turkey, you went to Oman, to India, and you mentioned that you took a road trip in Oman. And I wanted to just hear about that experience and what that was like, because that's a whole different kind of peel the curtain back on a different way of living type thing.
Every chance that we got as young professionals, we would travel. I think my favorite trip that I had while I was over there, a group of us went over to Beirut, and in our office of 130 people, there were 7 or 8 Lebanese. And the hospitality culture there is so rich that we went, and I think we would have had a good experience if we didn't know folks that were from the area. But we went, and they basically were like, you are family while you're here. And so we were taken to their favorite restaurants, their favorite nightclubs. And I mean, we just had a amazing experience getting to sort of become a part of the culture very briefly while we were there. And so those trips were very memorable. I don't want to say the opposite, but a very different experience was we got in a car and basically drove straight out of Dubai. And we're like, let's kind of see what happens. We didn't know anybody. We didn't know really where we were going. iPhones were around, but we really, like, Google Maps was not a thing. And, we had the Lonely Planets. That's basically what guided our experience. And it was not something I would do now, especially because, like, I need to sleep on a real bed. But we're like, I don't know, we'll just figure out where we're going to go. And I don't know whether we bought tents or borrowed tents, but we read in this thing like, oh, it'd be so cool to like wake up on this beach. How amazing would that be? It was not. And I'll describe more of that in a second. But the experience that stands out most to me, and again, people just live so differently all around the world. There are very few street signs or street names or physical addresses in a lot of the Middle East. Now, that may have changed over the last 10 years. It's been a while since I've been there. But there is not a North Central Expressway number 10,000. And so this book, this Lonely Planet, basically said, like, when you leave town going south, drive for 20 minutes, and then you'll go around 3 roundabouts. You'll pass a live chicken sign and take a left. And that's how you get down to the beach. And all of us were just so dumbfounded. Like, there's just no way this is going to work. This is in a Lonely Planet. God. And sure enough, we're like, that was 1 round, 2 roundabouts, 3 roundabouts. Oh my God, there's a live chicken sign. And so we took a left and we drove down to the beach, and we got down there, and it was like a record scratch, narrator, you're probably wondering how I got here moment. The beach was just covered in trash. It was chaos. We had I think a Nissan Altima type of car, and everyone else had 4-wheelers, and they'd driven out on the beach. We ended up setting up the tents, and, there's no bathrooms anywhere. It was a very odd experience. We woke up in the morning thinking, how cool is this going to be? The beautiful beach. It's like there were flies everywhere. And, the sun rose at that time of year at like 5:15 in the morning. We hadn't really gotten any sleep. And so there's these very different experiences that we had, where it's like incredible, you're a part of the culture. People welcome you. You stay in great hotels. And then there's the like wake up on the beach and really regret the experience. However, what stood out to me was the Omanis and the Jordanians, from my experience, were some of the most friendly people I've encountered in anywhere that I've been anywhere in the world. I think I've been to 40 countries. They were so welcoming and hospitable and helpful. And we're very clearly American. There was no, sense of like, we don't want you here. And it was such a warm culture of people in Oman, despite we didn't pick the best spot to try and camp. And in a lot of Oman, there was not the major historical sites or, everyone takes a picture of this thing. And I really enjoyed getting to experience that, because Had I not lived in Dubai, I probably never would have said, like, let's take a road trip through Oman. But really, there was a lot of natural beauty, wonderful people, really cool markets. And then, 3 roundabouts and a live chicken sign will stick with me for the rest of my life.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. I've thought a lot about, there's this essay percolating in the back of my mind about the importance of exposure for revealing the path that we're meant to be on in life and like what our work is to do in the world. I think a lot about it in terms of my kids actually, and what things do I want to help them get exposed to early enough that it can shape the paths that they choose to take. Because I think these experiences, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise, are formative in one way or another, and they help shape, okay, what's true about the world, what's possible for my world. Even just looking at the difference in your default lifestyle versus the default lifestyle of people in a place like Oman gives you a different view on, okay, what am I here to do? I think, or it gave me a different view. I've never been to Oman, but different, my versions of these things. And that then dictates, okay, well, what options am I going to consider? And like, what really is at risk at any given moment in time relative to the average risk a human faces in the world at a given moment in time? And through that lens, it's like starting a company is stressful. That is a real thing. It's a real thing to lose sleep and be stressed and your body to hurt and all of the stuff that comes from it. And it's different from where's my food going to come from tomorrow, which is not to imply that's what you took away from that experience. But those things are just related to me. And it's a lot of what I want for my kids. And a lot of what I wish a lot more people could get is just exposure to a lot broader array of what's going on in the world before you go and pick your path. So that's why I was fascinated in that. And as I kind of dug into your story, and we've obviously known each other, and so I know the basics, but as I got into the background, I saw these two kind of groups that you've been a part of over time. So one was the Global Shapers that we shared some overlap with, and then the other was the Stand Together network. And these being, as I see it, and I want to ask you, formative kind of experiences for you in terms of how you began to see the world and shape your belief systems. And there feels like a little bit of not a conflict between those groups, but a tension between them, where they represent different value systems that are not incompatible, but they are definitely different default value systems. And so I was just curious how being a part of each of those groups shaped you and how that began to help you triangulate what you believe about how the world works.
Wow. We could spend probably the next 4 hours on that. What I really loved about my experience with Global Shapers, and I sort of ended up a little bit falling away from it and haven't been engaged in a while, is I get to meet people like yourself. And there were some people here in Dallas, but people from across the United States that saw, hey, we can help make the world a better place. And that's going to look different to everyone. No one has the exact same idea on how to do it, but people coming together to make a difference is what the world needs. I still keep in touch with some friends. This is the beauty of social media. I mean, there's so many bad things about it, but it's been great. I mean, I don't think you and I have seen each other in person in maybe 10 years.
Yeah.
Something along those lines. But it's been so cool to watch your journey. And on the Stand Together side, I was introduced to, it used to be called the Seminar Network. It's now called Stand Together and has been for several years. When I went to one of the first dinners I was invited to here in Dallas, and then I went to one of their events, and I think the first one was in Palm Springs. It was actually, my son was a couple months old. It was his first time on a plane. It was the first time I really felt like, wow, I've been politically homeless for a very long time. And this is a group of people who I largely see the world the same way. Not just that we want to make a difference. I feel like sometimes I'm more articulate than less on this. And so this is an imperfect description. But what I see in so much of the team behind Stand Together and many of our donors, although some operate in their own world, is we want people to be able to improve their lives. And the more that we as a society can equip and empower people to improve their lives rather than have people from the top down decide for them how to do so, the better off everyone's going to be. And that is both true, as it turns out, and is why I became so passionate about the community overall in how to run a successful business and how to build a more prosperous society. And so the group was started basically about 20 years ago by Charles Koch. He had been thinking through these ideas for many, many, many years. And what he saw in his study of history, he fancies himself as more of a philosopher than a businessman, although he's obviously been very successful in business, is when you look at the societies that have flourished and have spread the most prosperity amongst their citizens and even beyond, it's the ones that tend to empower people more from the bottom up rather than the top down, to believe that people are capable of deciding for themselves better than others can decide for them. And that the governments that ultimately rule over people need to be restrained to as minimal level of engagement, oversight, and power as possible to allow the rise of the individual, because the greatest advancements in all of human history have come from individuals banding together, collective action to change society for the better, right? No government invented the light bulb. No government invented the steam engine. It's not to say that government doesn't have a role, but it's bottom up allows for greater prosperity amongst everyone rather than top down. And what really drew me in even further was it's also how the most successful businesses have ever been built and run, which is if the CEO, and this is an absurd extreme example, is telling everyone what to do all the time, very little will get done. You could have the most brilliant CEO in the world, but if you don't empower people to create within their area of responsibility, then they're just going to basically be, robots on a factory line. So Charles has written several books, but he wrote a book called Good Profit, which he shares his philosophy on how he built Koch Industries. It used to be called market-based management. Now it's called principles-based management. It's these ideas of the same fundamentals that have driven the most prosperous society in the world, the United States, and the precursors to that. At a point in time, the French and the British and the Dutch, they were the ones that really advanced society. The same principles apply in building a business. So respect for the individual, private property rights, free speech. These things are so fundamentally critical, and they're not at odds to each other. They're actually very complementary. So with that said, I was introduced to the community. I went to the first event in 2017. Yes, the group has done, one of the groups affiliated with the overall community does do political work. And that is because people who are elected to run the country make decisions that affect everybody. So there is a necessary participation in that process. But it's not politics that drives the group. And I understand why plenty of people feel like that is the case if they've heard that name or read anything about the group. But I ended up going to work for the Stand Together community for a little over 3 years. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But what I saw was I had an opportunity to help make society a better place using my experience of being an entrepreneur to try to help drive real change. And what I found was, especially, so I went in 2017, the community, the Stand Together community and the political arm of it did not endorse Trump in 2016. And that changed a lot of people's perspectives because it forced them to reckon with, oh, this isn't just if the person has an R next to their name, they endorse them no matter what. And that also allowed for some new partnerships that the community started to pursue with people they had formerly been very much at odds with. There was a lot of work done, very successful work done to help pass the First Step Act. I think it was 2018. I can't remember exactly what year, but in the First Step Act, the Stand Together and the community and Van Jones ended up doing a lot of really productive work together. And if you've read any of the backstory, Van Jones used to protest outside of Seminar Network's events and like bullhorn and sign. And Stand Together community, some of the individuals in there were very opposed to Van Jones and the Obama administration. But they ended up saying, look, we very much care about a criminal justice system that respects the rights of the individual and upholds a free and safe society. Let's work together here. And so this is a very long kind of framing for how it became so formative for me. It was the first time I felt like this is a group of people where I see the world the same way. And I don't consider myself a partisan. It's a very lonely place, especially in such a politically polarized world, to kind of look around me and go, I don't agree with any of you. And so to see a group of people that were so dedicated and passionate to helping individuals is part of why I ended up going to work with them in-house.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So on the kind of 5-factor personality model that's most widely accepted as kind of like a data-backed way to look at how our brains shape our personalities, my openness score is like off the charts. Very, very, very high openness. I think it's part of what makes me a good podcaster is I'm interested in how people's ideas get formed. And I think many people, like I had Benji Backer on the show recently. He is a conservative environmentalist, and most people would say those things are at odds with each other. And I'm interested in finding out, well, how are they How could they work together, in concert with one
Absolutely.
another? And there's a similar thing here where it's like if you get me talking at a dinner about the oil and gas industry, for example, which has been a lot of the core of Koch industries, oil and gas, plastics, chemicals, like a lot of these kind of infrastructure layer of society type things that have been necessary for society to develop to this point that also have downsides that we're having to cope with right now, right? It's like, that's what I would talk about. This is a very complex thing. We wouldn't be able to have this debate at this level of prosperity and this level of population if those things had not existed up to now. And so now we have what a former coworker would call champagne problems, which is we're dealing with all the downsides of that way of operating the world and how best to solve for that. And so there's this like thing that happens where if you mention a Koch brother, the default reaction is one way or the other most of the time, right? And I think that's probably why you give a long and detailed explanation of how you relate to the work of Stand Together, because there's a default reaction and then shutdown basically in one way or the other. And I'm really interested in the nuances of these things because it is both true that society as it is could not exist without oil and gas, and that we probably need to find cleaner ways to power the world over time so that we can balance out humanity's needs and like balance out human health and planetary health and all that stuff. And that's just a complex reality. That's a hard thing. I think similarly about on the regulatory front, it's like I'm probably default trust the individual. And then I see systemic failures of things where it's like, okay, so we've learned that PFAS is bad for human health. We think our best guess is it's not good for human health. And now we've got a lot of it all over the earth. What are we going to do about that? Right? Like an individual can't solve that, and business may not have the incentive to necessarily go and clean it up. And so what do we do? Well, maybe that's an area for government intervention, right? And so there's just these really detailed, nuanced discussions to be had about the balance of these things.
Yes.
And so I get really fascinated by these conversations about, I call myself a solutionist in my politics, which also makes me often politically homeless in terms of parties. But I'm interested in the different philosophies for how to go about solving problems. And this is one of them, is more of a market-based approach, free market-based approach, and trusting individuals to do what's best for them. So I guess the question, that's more of like a diatribe on my own front. A side note that I almost made a founder mode joke when you were talking about CEOs telling everyone what to do, but we'll just leave that there for now.
Oh boy, yeah.
I'm curious, like how you think about these systemic issues that we end up with that go beyond the individual, and like what the balance is there of how we tackle that stuff over time.
I'll maybe reframe away from any specific item that you just talked about, and then we can come back, because I think let's put it in a way that isn't specifically that, and we can come back to it. When COVID first hit, one of the most terrifying moments of nearly all of our lives, we can look back and think very differently about it in hindsight. For that first period of time, is really, really terrifying. There were very, very, very loud calls for Trump to enact I don't remember what it is, but it's basically like the emergency defense something to force manufacturers to build respirators because, oh my God, we have to have more respirators and we need to it's going to take 90 days to ramp up the respirators. And the calls were very, very loud for it. And the fact that he didn't, people trashed him for everything, but they were really ripping him for that. And 90 days later, it was like, actually, we don't want to be putting all these people on respirators. It's a terrible decision. But it was really close to the government coming in, seizing the means of production and using it because some people decided that was what had to be done. Now, especially in hindsight, we can look back and go, yeah, that was insane. Why would you do that? But at the time, a lot of people not only felt like it was clear, but that it was incontrovertible that this had to be done in order to save the world, right?
And I think it wasn't just to pause for a second. I think it would be more fair to say there was a probabilistic decision that needed to be made. We think we have some understanding that respirators are going to be needed in higher quantities, and so we better go make them. But that was a probabilistic reality based on what we thought we knew. And what turned out to be true was different, right? And so this is the complicated nature of these things is you don't have the hindsight when you're at the decision point. And so you have to work in probabilities and then think, all right, what's the best way to make this happen, right? Okay, all right, keep going.
Yes. And very rational conversations would allow you to say, what is the weighted probability? What are the factors driving those decisions? But what gets bubbled up is Trump refuses to basically like use the Defense Authorization Act to whatever. And then it gets into, and this is unequivocally, I will state, this is not a defense of Trump. Just put that all off to the side.
Yeah.
But in terms of like how definitive many things are stated, that Trump doesn't believe the science says you have to. And no, like there's no such thing as the science, and you have to peel it back. And there were trade-offs that had to be discussed going into that decision. That is, again, an easy one to talk about because in hindsight, it's clear that was a good thing that we did not do that. And so when I think about these complex trade-offs, the thing that most alarms me is when people make declarative statements like, this is true. There is no argument that, because we could stop using all hydrocarbons in something like 100 days all around the world, right? Stop all production, drain all reserves, drive whatever's in your car, and then there's no more hydrocarbons. We could do that. What would happen? An enormous number of people would die in a very short period of time. And so it's not just a money thing. It's not an incentive thing. It's just a lot of people would die. And there are plenty of other people who say, yes, and if we don't stop using hydrocarbons by this time, here's what's going to happen. Okay, we can have that discussion. But what I find most disturbing is how rare it is to be able to have a conversation to say, at what cost? What is the trade-off that we are talking about making? Because everything comes with a trade-off.
Right.
And the fact that one of the reasons that podcasts have, I think, become so popular is because so many people are so exhausted by what they read on the news and what they see on social media. And on podcasts, you can have a very long discussion and you can unpack things and you can get into the nuance and trade-offs. And that is what we need, because you can say, come hell or high water, I'm voting for this person in a couple months. And if you say, there's nothing wrong with them, they're the best candidate that has ever lived, and everything is perfect, I'm going to know that you're lying. If you say, I just am very comfortable with the trade-offs, and this is the person that I feel is going to make a better, yeah, I get it. Totally understand. And I also understand why some people go, I'm tired of choosing the lesser of two evils, I'm not participating. Those are all conversations that I feel very comfortable having. It's really frustrating when someone just goes, I can't even talk to you if you would consider doing X. When we're not actually talking about like murder, we're not talking about genocide. Like there are some very unequivocally clear that is pure evil. And we don't need to get into this. Well, it's all gray area, including, and I don't know if you've seen the controversy over the last couple, I guess, week or so. Like it's okay to say that Hitler was pure evil and arguably one of the most evil people of all time. We don't need to have a discussion about like, also, he may have had some good qualities, and he may have gotten like he may have tripped over himself with some of the military decisions that weren't exactly pure evil. I don't need to mince words, and I'm not interested in trying to understand why Hitler may not have actually been evil. It may sound like I'm talking in a circle here, but like some of the moral equivocation of like, well, we don't really understand. No, there are some bright lines, and that doesn't mean that we can't talk about what are the pros and cons of voting for this candidate or that candidate. And the fact that so many people are incapable of having those conversations today is really detrimental for society. I don't know that I see an end in sight, but I think the people in the 60s probably felt the same way, right? Like the 60s is probably the most recent time in history that felt this apocalyptic and chaotic. And, things got better. And then we went through this period of, change and prosperity that I don't think anyone in the 60s thought was possible.
Yeah. And one can hope that that's what we'll find our way to that. And history is cyclical. And so we should predict that it'll be both over a long enough period of time. The thing that I most agree with is this intellectual rigor and honesty that gets lost when we're not having conversations about ideas and trying to understand one another's perspective and update our priors for what we learn over time. That's one of the reasons I most respect both sides of the Van Jones Stand Together partnership. Is Van Jones has been a really powerful example of working with people who appear as political enemies as they might be positioned in the media and finding areas of overlapping priority to get things done. And that is an art I talked a lot about this in the Benji Backer episode or he talked a lot about this, of bringing people together around shared priorities. It's not like you're saying you two must be best friends and agree with everything going forward. It's saying, hey, look, you say this is a priority for you and you say this is a priority for you. So actually, this would be an area of progress for everyone that's good for society. Why don't we go get that done? Yeah. That is interesting to me. That is worthwhile to me. That comes back to this thing about conversations that are nuanced, right? Because now we can say we have this shared North Star. Now, what's the best overlapping solution that we can both agree on here so that we can push it forward? Yeah. And there's a lot of power in that. We need, from my seat, we need a lot more of that in society today. So
yes, we need that. We also need to not pretend that we can't vehemently and passionately disagree and then not still understand that like almost everyone in this country wants to put food on the table, take care of their family, enjoy life, generally be allowed to live as they want to live. That is what unites almost everyone in this country. Surely there are some people who want to tear apart the fabric of society. Sure. But like walk up to 100 people in the street and you're actually going to mostly say the top 5 things that matter to you in life are the same. And then it's okay to get heated in why you think that this candidate is maybe even bad for the country. Sure, you can have that conversation, but they're not evil and they're not a threat to your way of life because it's all within a relative bounds of where we want to be. What I find is on both extremes, you get people who are like incapable of talking to anyone they disagree with. And then you get a lot of people now who are like, nope, don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want anyone to get mad at me. So I'm just close my mouth. And that's not healthy either. Self-censorship is potentially even more ominous than getting shouted down because then just calm, rational people stop talking. And that's not healthy. It's really not healthy. And, you know, I've certainly been in conversations where you kind of walk away and you go, whoa, I definitely see that person a little differently now. Sure. But like, can we still go hang out at the neighborhood pool and let our kids play soccer together? Of course. But it doesn't mean that we need to only talk to people we agree with or not talk about it at all.
The priority for me has become really trying to understand the way that people's views have been shaped and how a reasonable person might come to believe what another person believes. And not trying to label people based on the conclusions of all of those things, that they are evil or they are wrong or they are whatever version of that. But then also on my end, being willing to say like, I don't know what I think about that topic. I'm really not sure yet. I'm still trying to figure that part out. It's like, here are some things that I've learned. Here are some things that inform what I think about it. And I know if pressed, I would have to come to a conclusion, you know, if I were in a decision-making role, but sometimes I just don't know. I'm not sure about the trade-offs on some things. And I've gotten a lot more comfortable just saying that, like, I'm not sure. And that's okay too. And that leaves a lot of room for exploration together. And I'm not trying to convince everyone to think like me. I'm actually just interested often in being understood and understanding. If you walk away from this conversation, you don't believe what I believe, that's fine. That's okay. We can still be friends. But I appreciate it if you want to understand me and I want to understand you. Like that, to me, is the fabric of mutually reinforcing positive relationship, right? So anyways, that's our soapbox on that, I suppose.
I was just going to say, to put an all-encompassing frame on that, my friends who can only talk about the political, it doesn't matter whether I more so agree with them or less so agree with them. If that's all that drives them and motivates them and they pay attention to, it's the only thing that we seem to be able to talk about, I'm just not that interested in that friendship. Whether I agree with them or disagree with them, if that's all you're going to talk about, it's kind of exhausting because there's so much more to life than that. And it's not whether or not I would be more likely to agree with you or less. It's more just like, I don't know, it's kind of obnoxious. Is there anything else that we could talk about here? So that is another thing I think about with friends on the political side is I'd like to not have that be the only thing that we engage on.
Yeah. I'm with you there. And it's one of the reasons that business is so attractive to me. It's one of the reasons that talking about family is so attractive to me. And just generally ideas that drive how we approach our world and work and all of that. And so we're going to get into all of that actually to tee that up nicely. And one of the beliefs that I've come to hold probably most strongly is that I genuinely believe in business as one of the most powerful forces for good in the world. I think that done well under the right leadership, business can enact positive change in its employees and its customers and its communities where it operates and the leaders that grow through leading companies. And I think you've been a wonderful example of that, first at Mizzen+Main and now at Harbor. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I've seen, from afar, mostly how you've grown over time, but also the very thoughtful ways in which you've led and built your teams out and use your businesses as a way of reflecting your values for building wholesome, good places to show up to work every day. That's my view from the outside looking in. I'm sure someone's been annoyed at you at some point, and there's all of that. But I remember when you first launched Mizzen+Main, or right after you first launched, was about the time that we were meeting. And I think at the time I probably ordered like a half dozen, every color basically of the one shirt that you were making, which was like a key part of the story, right? Was there was this limitation there. And I got a thank you note in the box that was handwritten from you. And this is a thing that you've talked about before, that you wrote a handwritten thank you note for every order for the first 18 months of the business. And number one, I think that that's a reflection of who I know you to be and just kind of the way that you care for the people whose trust that you have. But I was curious when you finally were like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I am going to have to let go of this principled thing I'm doing because my hand is going to fall off or whatever happened.
Yeah. So certainly it was, of all the things I can do in a day to grow this business, that was one of them that I could do, especially at that time. I think the specific point was when somebody else started fulfilling our product. So it was all done out of my house for a long time. And so it was real easy to put them in the box. We also had a lot of days where I didn't get any orders. And so, I could catch up on some notes. But the experience there was certainly a reflection of my learning from Gary Vaynerchuk. I think he wrote The Thank You Economy. And I took some of those lessons, his book, Jab, 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 Right Hook. He talked about ordering, somebody a signed football jersey from their favorite whatever. And we did various things like that along the way. One of the guys that was an early customer, I saw he had a child. And so we sent him a baby gift. And then another one of our customers wrote in, he was deployed overseas and he was buying a shirt for his son's graduation. And he said, could you put a note from me? And so I wrote, a congrats from your dad. And those one-on-one experiences are really treasured in terms of, I know how much of an impact it had because some of those people I still talk to because they were customers. The slightly different take on that this time with Harbor is I have been working directly with moms and dads and our director of nursing, helping them get their children to learn how to sleep. And we'll unpack more about Harbor. But I'm doing face-to-face video interviews with these families, and it's deeply personal. I'm recruiting them into the studies. I'm telling them, trust me, trust my team to watch your child overnight and help you get more sleep. And so it is a very, very high level trust engagement. And then to hear either directly or through Kelly, our director of nursing, some of these moms saying things like, you gave me hope to have a third child. And another mom said, I haven't slept since my first trimester. And you have helped actually, I can see the light out of my postpartum depression for the first time. When you help someone sleep in a time when they haven't had any and they are exhausted, they are emotional, they are hormonal, you don't just oh, thanks. You have changed their life. And getting that engaged with people and hearing from them how much what we have built has changed their lives, that level of personal engagement, I know I won't be able to do for long. I'm hoping Harbor goes even faster than Mizzen did, but I will continue to have direct relationships with some of our customers, just certainly won't be able to do that at scale.
Yeah, that one-to-one connection with customers, I think just really shapes, or I know it shaped for me when I was leading ConvertKit, the degree to which I prioritize different things. It really helped me understand our business in a different way. When I was getting text messages from large creators on our platform saying either here's a need that I have or here's something that broke and it really affected me, that's a different level of thing than when it's just a generic customer service email. and a
Yes.
person maybe at an outsourced provider answering it. And it can be both really, really special and can build you up, and it can be really devastating at times as well. It goes both ways. And I'd say one of the biggest things that I have come to accept and learn about life over the past probably 5 years is that those things coexist for a reason. Like the grief and pain of life exists right alongside the joy and the upside of life. And they really can't exist without each other. It's like the contrast that creates the existence of both. And so much of being a founder is managing the ups and the downs and the highs and the lows. We've got this kind of fun thing where Mizzen+Main was your first time building a company, and it was a completely new industry. You had no training in it. You were like learning everything from ground zero. You've got different versions of that now because it's more tech, it's more kind of like hardware versus apparel. And so there's new lessons, but you're a second time founder. Like you've been through building a team, you know some of the lessons. And one of the things I've heard you talk about is managing those highs and lows and how you relate to your work in the business. And I wonder what you're doing differently this time around to kind of, I always imagine it as like this graph of a roller coaster. Yeah. And if you can keep a boundary on how much you ride the roller coaster up and down, it's a little bit easier to manage your own emotions and your own well-being and like mental health over time. So what are you doing differently this time around to try and keep that boundary there in terms of how high and low you ride the roller coaster?
The biggest thing is I have 2 young kids. I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old son. And while I was building Mizzen+Main, we had our first child. But having your first kid and an infant, like, especially as a dad, there's not nearly as much that I can do in a given day for a period of time. But now, we've got school drop-offs and we've got activities, and on the weekends, it's full on kid time. I think ultimately the biggest difference is my kids are I view appropriately bigger priority than my business. Putting this out there in the internet, some investor is going to be like, oh, you don't really care about your business.
Oh, well, don't invest in Kevin. Yeah.
It's okay. I spoke to 200 investors that didn't want to invest in Harbor already. But I view that as appropriately managing decision-making, priority, and trade-off in a way that says, like, I know what matters. And I'm not going to chase the shiniest object. I have to build this company. I have to deliver the results. I'm going to do that. I used to be much more open of I'm meeting somebody in New York and I'll be like, I'll just stay in New York for 3 or 4 days and just kind of see what meetings I can drum up. And sure, there's probably a lot of wasted time and some spontaneous things that came out of that. But now it's like, I'm going to fly in at 10 p.m. and I'm going to have my meetings and then I'm going to come home. And I am much more ruthless in the trade-offs. I'm not really interested in going to conferences. I'm not really like, it is incredibly important that what I do drives the success of the business, because I want to put my kids to bed at night. I want to be able to coach their soccer games, and I want to create something valuable and meaningful that matters professionally. And that is in harmony. Certainly there are some people who will work 100 hours as startup founders and grind it out. But like, I don't know, the best startup founders that I know don't need to work 100 hours a week. You just don't. If you're the guy or girl coding and like you spend 6 months coding the product, maybe. But in building Harbor, we've built a camera, a tablet, all of the firmware, all of the software, all of the back end, the marketing engine, the brand. Like there's so many work streams that are pulling together to create this incredibly secure, reliable, quality product that parents have to be able to trust. That it's not about sitting in front of a keyboard because it's literally just raw output. It's actually about managing 100 different work streams, and that's a different skill set. That would be number one. The second thing, differently in terms of managing those highs and lows, I think I ended up doing a pretty good job at this with Mizzen. Out of the gate, not so much. I faced some really dark moments. You talk about customer service, and it's not just some outsourced support agent. Info at Mizzen+Main was auto-forwarded to my personal or my Mizzen+Main email for like 3 years. And that was hell on earth because I had all the emails that I needed and then all the customer service, and I was doing returns and exchanges and all of that. It was just straight up drowning for 3 straight years. And it was dark for me, like a very overwhelming, I don't want to get out of bed, dark. And we started to get some traction and I got to hire some people and things got a little bit better. But On the managing of the highs and the lows, it's been a very difficult 2 years building Harbor in the sense that it's so complex to launch a product like this. You read all the startup MVP, we'll just quick launch and see if it works. You can't mess up watching someone's child and giving them the technology to know that their kid is safe. And ultimately, this is why I built the product, because the best product on the market, Nanit, failed our family. It's not a quality, reliable product that I trusted for my family because it failed on us. And so in order to build hardware and software at this level, it's been 2 years that my co-founder and I have been working on it. We have a team, developers, contractors. Go ahead and show it right now. We have a camera that we built and a tablet that we built. It is a lot, millions and millions and millions of dollars in R&D and prototypes, salaries, contractor fees. And so going through that process, we have been raising money basically since I started the company in the worst fundraising environment in over a decade. And people don't want to invest in consumer right now, and they definitely don't want to invest in something that has atoms. If you can touch it, they don't want to invest in it. All of the, VC landing pages that say, we want to invest in an entrepreneur who's going to change the world. We want to partner with them in the earliest of days, who transform, the way that we live, work, play, and eat. And then you bring something to them that's going to do that as a repeat founder. Oh, no, not that type of transformation, right? We were thinking more B2B SaaS and how we track our to-dos as a family. That's super exciting. You're right, that is transforming the world. One of the more memorable no's that I got was from a VC. Their sole mandate was transforming the care economy. How do we care for our children up through our elderly loved ones? And when I was like, here we go, this is it, they're like, I think this is going to be really hard. That was their no. And hopefully that's an amorphous enough response that I'm not calling out someone specifically, although I don't really care at this point. But the no's were so baffling. There were a couple that I got where they're like, I just don't think that this is going to work. Straight up, I don't believe that you will be successful. I wish you all the best. I'm like, cool. That's a really direct no. I disagree with you, obviously, but I respect you so much. But going through this process on the highs and the lows, the hardest thing is just this amorphous, non-answer where they say, we'll get back to you in a week or two, and then a month goes by and they still haven't gotten back to you. Dragging that out has been just really soul-sucking because it requires a significant amount of investment just to physically build the product. And all these people pretend like you're exactly what they want. And then after the third conversation with the third partner, they're like, call us in a year. And that's what they told me a year ago. That has been very, very emotionally draining and very difficult this time around. And it was just different with Mizzen because, I paid for the first 1,000 shirts myself and I started selling them. And then when someone would be like, well, I don't think people are going to like this. I'm like, I've sold 500. They seem to like it. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I don't. I'm like, all right, well, then that's a reason for you not to invest. This has been a very different experience in that way. And managing that high and low, it's not like we've had a devastating experience. It's just this long, dragged out inability to just bring the capital in and go execute. We're done with our seed round now, thank God. And now I can just focus on building. But that has been the harder thing for us to manage, for me to manage this time around. That's just different from when I built Mizzen+Main.
Yeah. There's so much there. I'm going to use this as our opportunity to take a pause for a moment, about a little bit past our halfway point. And when we come back, I want to pick back up here and ping back and forth between Mizzen and Harbor and just kind of playing with some of this, what you learned the first time around that you get to bring to the second time around framework for talking about both companies. And then I want to talk about a couple of ideas that I've heard from you, just in terms of how we lead, how we live, as a way to kind of wrap up our conversation. So that's what people can look forward to. Hey, it's Barrett. You've reached about the midpoint of this conversation. And while we take a little break for station identification, as they say, I want to tell you about two things. First of all, I write a newsletter every Saturday for founders and creators who are leading teams and companies to make an impact through your work. It has 3 sections in it. The first one is a mini essay from me based on my executive coaching work with founders and creators about how to lead well. It has 3 long-form essays or links from around the web that will help spark new thoughts to help you lead better. And it has one quote from a meaningful book that I often find myself recommending to friends and clients. All the feedback I've gotten so far is that it hits exactly on the kinds of issues that founders, CEOs, and creators are facing every day in their work. So if that sounds appealing to you, make sure to go to my website at barrettbrooks.com and you can subscribe right at the top of the homepage. That's BARRETTBROOKS.com. The second thing I want to tell you about is that my day job, I actually do have a day job, I'm not just a podcaster yet, is as an executive coach, as I just mentioned. I work with founders of Series A startups and later, and with creators who are doing at least $1 million as a solo founder and are now thinking about growing a team. The uniting commonality between the founders and the creators I work with is that you've reached a point in your business where you know you're going to make it. Actually, you're doing quite well. And now the question is, how much do you want to scale? And what are the leadership challenges that you're going to face along the way? This work is based on both my training as a coach and in my work as an operator and growing my old company ConvertKit from $3 to $30 million in annual revenue. If you're a founder or creator who might benefit from coaching, or if you know someone who's looking for a coach, I'd love for you to check out my site and my coaching page at barrettbrooks.com/coaching. You can learn everything about how I work as a coach and also fill out a form to have an exploratory conversation if that sounds interesting to you. All right, that's all I got for you right now. There's no sponsors for the show at the moment, so consider me your sponsor. Let's get back to the conversation for the second half. I saw there was an essay on your Medium page that was, so David Perell is a teacher, a podcaster. He runs a podcast called How I Write. Consider him a peer and contemporary of ours. I really enjoy his work. He's a very insightful teacher and writer himself. And one of my favorite new podcasts of the past couple of years as well. And he has this course that he taught for a long time called Rite of Passage. And it was basically a way to help people. I think basically everyone I know that has done interesting things in life imagines themselves as wanting to write about those things. Like, I would like to capture this in some way at some point. And David's course was one of the best places I knew to go figure out how to do that, how to actually start writing. So one of the early assignments is to publish something,
Yes,
anything really. And you published the initial essay and said, hey, I'm taking this course, Rite of Passage. And it made me really curious about, okay, you're right in the middle of launching this company and trying to get the production line going and the initial pre-orders out and all of this stuff. And you decided, I'm going to go take this writing course. And setting aside the logistics of how you would possibly have time to write, I'm just curious about what the motivation was and the drive to take that course and where you were coming from on that.
David is a wonderful human. He's a fascinating guy. I do remember the first time I came across him, he had received a grant from Tyler Cowen. Tyler is one of the most interesting humans in the world. And I will go back to one of the other ties between David and myself is Brent Beshore. I went to college with Brent's brother. I've ended up becoming better friends with Brent over the last many years. And I had I think a WordPress blog that I did a little bit of blogging on. And Brent and I think had lunch here in Dallas. I can't remember, but basically Brent was blogging a lot. He was doing stuff with Forbes. And I think he was sort of finding his voice in the power of his voice. And he basically said to me, you should write more. You should write often. You will surprise yourself. And what I have discovered, and we were riffing a little bit on this before the beginning, is like building an audience is incredibly powerful. And I told you at the start of this, I don't really want to build an audience for an audience's sake. That is not to cast aspersions on it. I don't dismiss anybody that does. That's not what I want to do. I'm not interested in becoming a writer long term or, writing a newsletter. I enjoy writing, but it is such a brutally difficult process that I actually know I don't really want to do that. However, what I have found is from my time at Mizzen+Main, I'm by no means famous, but I have enough of a following on primarily LinkedIn that it has become an incredibly valuable tool in building Harbor. It's opened a lot of doors. It's helped me recruit. It has helped me sell. It's helped me get press. When writers or podcasters look, they're like, oh, all right, well, he's got a little bit of an audience. And I'm, again, not famous, but I have audience. And so with that background, I know that I'm a pretty good writer. I write well enough. But the difference between pretty good writing and great writing It's about this big as to what it looks like from the outside, but the impact is, right, it's basically infinite. I don't remember who said it. It was, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yeah.
The great writing stays with you forever. And I find it so humorous, all these people who talk about, oh, AI, like there's not going to be any writers anymore. And man, great writers are going to become all the more valuable because it's going to be very easy to churn out an enormous amount of shitty content.
Yes.
And so I took the course because I have ideas that I believe are appropriately sharp elbowed without being offensive in trying to help parents and kids get more sleep. So our mission at Harbor is happier parents and healthier families, one restful night at a time. And we also have a core value of basically we're non-judgmental and we're not going to tell anybody you're doing it wrong. But I feel very passionately that there is a right way to help your child sleep and to help you get more sleep. And there's science behind why it's really important for both you as a parent and your child to get really healthy sleep. And there's a lot of really dumb influencers who put out a lot of really misguided information around sleep and, raising children. And so I did learn a lot through that. I have failed to follow through, as is often the case with most writers, to write my opus piece. I had a lot of grand visions to do it. Part of the reality is at the beginning of the summer, when I took the course, late spring, beginning of the summer, my wife ended up having a somewhat serious health issue, and it just totally derailed this is what I'm going to do in my little bit of extra time. However, one of the things that's come out of it is I'm now, I guess the word is vlogging. So on an almost daily basis, sometimes I won't go for 2 or 3 days. At the end of the day, I'm sharing what I've been doing on Harbor. Some things I can't be that public on. There's this build in public mentality, partially for confidentiality and partially for legal reasons. I don't feel comfortable sharing everything that I would like to. But whether it's 45 seconds or 4 minutes, just a quick hit on what I'm doing, and just started doing it for just because. But it's also an extension of the work I did learning from David and hearing from Brent, seeing people like yourself, building an audience. And I want to tell the Harbor story, because if I do that really well, we will be more successful as a business and ultimately help more parents and kids. So that is a very long answer to why did I decide to do that? David's takeaways to the things that he has done have really helped me challenge some of the quick stuff that I'm doing. I by no means a perfect student and have everything that he does guide everything I do in writing, but it's been very eye-opening for that's not that interesting. Like, don't bother with that. And he's got some really good tricks and hooks that I would encourage anyone go listen to him. And I think the last course, he's ultimately shutting down Rite of Passage after this last course. If you're interested, I would encourage anyone to go do it.
Yeah, for sure. And agreed. Storytelling in business is still somehow, I think, undervalued by founders. There's so much you have to get right on product, on the technical side of things, on finding product market fit, all of this stuff. But when it comes to scaling and resonance and staying power and just what it really takes to make something sustainable over a long period of time, man, humans are story machines.
Yes.
We like stories, we remember stories, we share stories. And it's so much why I love doing this podcast. It's like, this is the stories of the people building the things that we all know and love, or sometimes that are invisible to us, but make the world go round. This week's episode that came out right before we recorded this, which means there will be like a 6-week gap, is Laura Behrens-Wu, who built Shippo, which for, a company like Mizzen+Main or Harbor is a critical piece of infrastructure, or an option for a critical piece of infrastructure for shipping, because without that, your product's not getting to anybody. Mm-hmm. And so I just love hearing the stories and telling the stories of the people actually building the stuff we all use every day. And writing is an incredible tool to do it. So anyways, +1 for me on that. One of the things that I saw you do really well at Mizzen+Main that I'm fascinated by how it's transforming and shaping the way that you're building Harbor is you ended up partnering with a couple of people who are very well known to help build the Mizzen+Main brand. So JJ Watt was one of the earliest, ended up partnering with Phil Mickelson, and you kind of got this traction in the sports world that gave you some some kind of like cachet was the way I looked at it. It was like, these were good shirts already, but now look, even professional athletes wear them. This creates another level of kind of like awareness and affinity. And the way I see this playing out now at Harbor is you're working with, I call them creators, you call them influencers, who are moms sharing education and content about sleep, having babies, building families, all of this as really a marketing channel, like in business terms, but as a relationship building channel too, with these people and having genuine advocates for the company. And I'm just kind of curious, like how you see those things being related and how that's shaping the way that you're going to market with Harbor right now.
So the journey in building Mizzen+Main was a long, slow slog where, again, I made 1,000 shirts and I started selling them and sold 10, and then I sold 50, and then I sold 100. And it was a while before we really started to hit, hundreds of thousands and then millions of dollars in revenue. With Harbor, the bigger challenge here is, and there were plenty of people who told me, don't do hardware, take a different approach. And I'm going to tangent here for a second. I understand why people love just investing in software and they don't want anything that has atoms or in the real world. However, if you build something in the real world that changes someone's life, it is infinitely more valuable to them than yet another piece of software that they could throw away in an instant. Yet another to-do list app, yet another AI creator, whatever. They're fine. And there are people who are great at that. Awesome. But like, if our baby monitor makes it so that you and your child get more sleep and you can rest easier through the experience, you will sing our praises to every single person that you know. And it's not about a network effect. The product doesn't become more valuable if your friends join. But you want your friends to benefit from the knowledge that you have learned. I remember vividly when we told our friends that we were having a kid. I mean, the number of recommendations. And part of it is because people like to be in the know. But part of it is also this sense of like, if there is any way that I can make this 0.1% easier for you, it is such a mind-blowingly difficult and stressful and exhausting time. Wonderful, yes, all of those things, but like the pain is real. And so if I can make it somewhat easier for you, I want you to have this knowledge.
Yep.
And when it comes to strollers and car seats and the baby Roo, the mama Roos, all of those, people are like, you got to know about this. No one feels that way about their baby monitor. Baby monitors are like, at best, I don't know. It was fine. Like kind of did what it was supposed to. It was just a little glitchy. And so we have this belief in what we're building that like the baby monitor is the beginning of the relationship where we can do lots of additional things with parents and families. And if we can be that baby monitor of choice, the viral nature of the product will make it so that we are so much more than just a physical thing. However, and now I'll go back to, the initial question.
Well, let me just tell. So let's pause there for a second, and then I want to come back to the original question. So the things I've heard you talk about that I think are fantastic because we use Nanit. I loved the Nanit, except for there were a couple nights where it turned off. And there was one night where our kid was crying for several hours. We finally heard the kid, not through the monitor, through
the walls.
Yes. And went and got him. And it was like, that was a hard night. And I felt very concerned after that. And my wife even more so. And so like when you share that story about having a similar experience, except for your kid was fine and like everything was all together good, and my kid was fine too. Like at the end of the day, it was all good.
Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. However, it's a terrible experience as a parent.
Yeah. Because you want to be there for them, right? Like you want to be able to support them. And so that part resonates with me. But then when I hear this like bigger vision for what you're building and this like service layer on top of the tech that you've created where you can opt into this program where we will be almost like a remote night nurse, where you turn the sound down if it's not needed and you turn it up and say, go get the kid when it is needed. And you have professionals helping determine which is which.
Yes.
That is incredible because as you put it, it gives access to a thing that typically only very wealthy families have access to, which is a night nurse, which allows you to get sleep. And then there's this layer of turning that into software features that you can opt into where I can say, I want to hear this type of noise, not this type of noise.
Yes.
And there's variable compute that can happen through the chips and the hardware that allow it to say, if baby does this, turn the sound up. If baby does this, don't wake the parent up.
Yes.
That is incredible. And then I've heard you talk about things like, okay, if we're already doing that service layer, can we also offer things like middle of the night, baby wakes up, baby has a fever, parents are freaking out, don't know whether this is a problem or not. Can we offer them a healthcare consult right then?
Yes.
And other service layers downstream from that? I just think it's like a brilliant long-term roadmap. Who knows if it comes true, but in terms of vision, it's like, oh yeah, I'm right there with you. I get exactly why that would be the kind of thing, both that would be valuable to you and parents would value at that stage of life. So I'm just doing your promoting for you there.
Thanks.
How's that for a minute?
That's great. So yeah, maybe just I'll take a moment and recap. Ultimately, when it comes to parents picking a baby monitor, 3.6 million children are born in the United States every year. Unfortunately, that number is declining, and that is a real problem. There are nihilists and degrowthers who are very happy that the population in the United States is decreasing. That is not a good thing for anyone. Ultimately, it's decreasing for a lot of reasons. I can't solve all of them. I can't really solve any of them. However, what I might be able to do is make it just a little bit easier to have a kid. And maybe instead of everyone saying all the time that it's the most difficult thing that you'll ever go through, it's like, well, it's as bad as I thought it was going to be. If we could do that, maybe it'll be just a little bit easier to have a kid. Parents have to choose between old school camera and a little 3 or 5 inch LCD screen. It only works within 100 feet, typically not through certain types of walls. You can't record, you can't rewind. Typically, it's pretty junky hardware, even from well-known brands, because they're selling you one piece of hardware, one time. It's how do we make it as cheaply as humanly possible across our 2 kids. We bought 4 of them because they broke all the time. But the benefits are it's a dedicated device that only serves to monitor your kid. It alerts you if there's a disconnect, and it doesn't need the internet. So you can travel with it. If your internet goes down, and if your power goes out, you're going to get an alert. Or you choose a Wi-Fi camera with an app on your phone. Nanit is the leader in this. Owlet is another one. Miku is a startup that just went bankrupt. There are other companies like that. And a lot of parents end up, frankly, just getting a Nest camera because it's fine enough if you're just going to have a camera with an app on your phone. But the reality is a camera with an app on your phone is not a baby monitor.
So say more about that. So this is a good line that you have. I think it's a really effective ongoing message that you share.
Yes.
Say more about why that's true.
Because a baby monitor monitors your child continuously, uninterrupted, and alerts you if it fails or disconnects. That is a baby monitor. A security camera that you point at your child is convenient to pull up an app on your phone if you're out to dinner, or you want to check in on the nanny, or you decide I'm going to go for a walk around the block, and did my husband put the baby down at 7 p.m. when he said he was going to, and you just pull it up real quick. That's great. That's point in time. It's an app. It's convenient. It's on your phone. But these apps run in the background, the audio in the background. That's how you monitor them if you're not staring at your phone.
Yep.
The problems with this are many. The first is if you do anything else on your phone, you may not be monitoring your kid. So if you get a phone call, you're not monitoring your kid. You can't have audio from a device and talk on the phone. If you forget to plug your phone in and your phone dies, no app can alert you your phone is not plugged in. It doesn't work.
Right.
All of us have done it at some point in time, whether it's at home or somewhere else. You plug your phone in and the outlet is dead, or the cord is broken, or you didn't turn the switch on. You're not going to know if your phone dies. And then, of course, if your ISP goes down or your router has issues, there's no way to alert you without fail that you are no longer monitoring your kid. And that's what happened to me. And as it turns out, now I've talked to thousands of parents, the unreliability issues of Nanit are very real problems that plenty of people face. Some people go, I don't care, doesn't matter. Sure, that's fine. If you don't care, then you don't care. However, it's not something that most people know until they run into that problem, because they don't warn you this is not actually to be relied upon. And so what we did... It'd
be a weird marketing message if they did.
It would. What we did was we built a camera and a dedicated 10-inch tablet that connect directly to each other without internet. Both devices also connect to the internet. So you get the best of both worlds. If you go to a hotel and there's no, you can't tap your devices into hotel Wi-Fi, you can just plug and play. You're using it. Internet doesn't matter. Importantly, this only exists to serve hardware. We built the device, we built the software, we built the firmware. And so if your camera loses connection with the internet for any reason, or Wi-Fi issues or whatever, it fails over into direct local communication. The camera and the tablet talk directly to each other. And if there's a power outage, because there's not a battery in this camera, this will alert you, I'm no longer connected. The tablet will alert you, I'm no longer connected. You're not monitoring your kid anymore.
Yeah.
We also built in some really important functionality and security into it. So the camera has a memory chip in the camera itself and an AI computer vision chip in the camera itself. And so from a security perspective, that means two things. One, we never process or store any of your data. All of it is stored and processed at the edge locally, not through our servers. If you don't leave your house, your footage doesn't leave your house, which is not true for any of these other Wi-Fi devices. So with Nanit, Owlet, Nest, Ring, all of that stuff, they all process things through their cloud, and you store your footage on their cloud. So from a security, a reliability, and a latency perspective, that just changes the game. And then the computer vision chip that's in the camera, everything that is done from a sound detection, facial recognition, face up, face down, all the things that we can already do and will do, all of it's processed at the edge, not going through the internet. Similar to like Tesla cameras, everything is processed on the car itself. If you were, hey, is that light red or green going to the internet and back? That's a real problem. And there's so many advancements that have happened that it's great that we can do all of that locally. The last thing I'll say, and then talk briefly on the remote night nanny from what we're building, is having single purpose technology is coming back in a big way. I know most people don't like reading a book on their phone. They want to read either a physical book,
I take my Kindle with me,
or a Kindle, because if I'm reading a book, the chance that I stop reading and go do something else is really, really, really high. I just want to
Same thing for writing. I've seriously thought about buying a typewriter for that reason.
And there are some sort of Kickstarter-esque projects that are like modern typewriters because of what a problem it is for all of us. The single purpose technology means all it does is monitor your kid. And so importantly, also, if you have a babysitter, you just hand them the monitor. You're not giving them access to your camera. You're not leaving one of your iPads or phones unlocked with access to other parts of your whatever. And so the benefits of this are many, including the ability for the monitor to allow you to say, I only want to wake up for, let's say, my 2-year-old. I only want to wake up if they're crying or making noise for more than 5 seconds. Because if they wake up and cough, cough, cough and go right back to sleep, you don't need to hear it. Now, you may say, I want to hear everything. That's fine. You can do that. But most parents end up learning by the time their kid is 1.5, 2 years old. You don't need to hear almost anything, but you don't want to give up and not monitor them anymore, because technology can make our life better. It can also drag us down, which is the current options.
Okay, so I want to pause you for a second, because there's this question I really wanted to ask you, which is, I saw this at Mizzen, and we're going to come back to the like influencer and like how that marketing thing works, because we've kind of like dived deep, and we're going to pull back out as we wrap up here in a little while. At Mizzen and at Harbor, you have made very effective use of what in like storytelling terminology would be a foil or a villain or like a bad guy.
Yes.
And I've noticed that it seems intentional or valuable to you in some way to say, here is the antithesis of what we're trying to do. Therefore, it helps me kind of pinpoint the value we create more. And so at Mizzen, it was like all of the people who rejected the idea of performance fabric dress shirts and then quickly followed you into the market when they saw that it was working.
Sure.
And at Harbor, it's been Nanit, or Nanit is kind of like the foil for this group of things that is not made to do what you're trying to do. And I'm just curious, like, how do you see that serving the company, and how do you use that strategically to help build your value proposition?
It's a dance that I don't ever feel like I've nailed, or I would say this is the playbook someone else should do specifically. I am a huge believer in Simon Sinek's start with the why. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. However, most of the fluffy marketing stuff where it's really esoteric and it's how does it make you feel? When we talk about some of these messages for what is Harbor, well, Harbor is happier parents and healthier families one restful night at a time. Okay, so that's the message that you get. You, Barrett, who have no idea who I am or what Harbor is, you're like, I don't know, what's that? And sure, maybe that was like, oh, how nice is that? But you're not going to go look up Harbor. You are not going to just hop into our marketing funnel that way. And so we can't just say it's a better baby monitor, because everyone in the world is going to say that. So in these early days, and this is really a big part of what we're doing right now, with incredibly fragmented attention and a very small marketing budget, how do I make sure that you know exactly why we exist? And we exist to solve a real problem for people with kids who need to be monitored, which is there are millions of them every single year.
Something that strikes me about this as you're talking is that there's something about the competitive market. I mean, in some ways, like baby monitors are a largely saturated market. There are options available.
Yes,
dress shirts
many.
are a saturated market.
Yes.
Podcasts are a saturated market, right?
It's,
They might be growing, but there's something about that strikes me that's really important here, that you have to differentiate from the other options in a competitive market, in a saturated market especially.
Yes. With Harbor, from the very beginning of going public, because I worked on this for 18 months before we really told anybody what we were doing, from the very beginning, we know when it comes to like the number one leader in the market, it is Nanit. Nanit has a Wi-Fi camera with an app on your phone, and our message is apps on phones are baby monitors. Okay, that's fine. But what is Harbor? And so one of the things that we've done from the beginning is just tell our story. Nanit failed on us. Parents and kids deserve better. So we built Harbor.
Yep.
Now you know exactly what's going on. Now you don't know exactly, you couldn't describe our product, but you're like, relative to Nanit. And if you're a parent, you know who Nanit is because they spend an enormous amount of money on marketing. And it's the best amongst not a great group of products. That's generally the way that I would frame that. And so it is a very fragmented market, but it's a market absolutely ripe for the taking. People don't love Nanit. I've done a bunch of research. From everything that I can tell, their net promoter score does not seem to be very high. And so it's like, make sure you get this stroller, make sure you get this car seat. For me, it was once we started formula feeding, Baby Brezza was the single best purchase I made as a parent because it just made our life 3 a.m. making a bottle, you press a button and you have it. It was a life-changing experience. So I told every parent about it. That doesn't exist with baby monitors. So how do I make it really easy in a very short period of time for people to understand Harbor is something I should pay attention to? And so if you understand our perspective, which is Nanit failed us, and so therefore Harbor, you're now going to at least contextualize what it is that we're doing. Because if my advertising just said, Harbor will restore sleep and sanity to new parents, what does that mean? That could be a sound machine. It could be an aromatherapy. It could be a meditation app. Like it could be anything.
Yeah, it's kind of ephemeral.
Yeah, that is a big part of what we've done. We are rolling out, and I know this won't release for a little while, we are rolling out a new set of messaging, which is basically your baby monitor is failing you, Harbor won't. Because if you're not a Nanit customer and you just have one of these old school devices, the old school radio monitor, well, guess what? You can't record, you can't rewind, you can't check in on the nanny, you can't check in outside the house, you can't be alerted only when it matters. And so your baby monitor is failing you either literally like it did us, or because you deserve better. There's so many more ways that your baby monitor could improve your life, could improve your sleep, could improve your family. And so I believe very much in the let's inspire people for the art of the possible. But if we think about what does a billboard say, or what does a ad on Meta say, if we're just really like parents deserve sleep, your family deserves the best, that doesn't mean anything. I don't know what to do with that information. And there's different messages at different parts of the funnel. But competitive positioning has been very effective for us because when I say your baby monitor's failing you, Harbor won't, you're like, oh, why? What would make Harbor better? Now, there's more education and we need to pull you into the funnel. But if all I say is Harbor's the best baby monitor, like everyone says that.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't say that yours is better? Of course you're going to say that. So we are candidly working through the mechanics of a negative positioning and a positive positioning because there's pros and cons to being uplifting and being inspiring. I will say, I'm sure in some of the research ahead of time you saw, Nanit sent us a very aggressive legal letter.
Yeah.
Because I've been very blunt in our advertising. And I had a lawyer draft our response because I'm going to make sure that I have a fiduciary responsibility to my company and always follow the law. I believe in that directly, but I knew I was doing nothing wrong and I definitely knew I was doing nothing illegal. And so I ultimately decided when it comes to writing to publish the story of what happened. And as it turns out, that was like the greatest SEO gift that Nanit could have possibly given me because I published it on my personal blog, kevinslavelle.com, on Medium. Actually, no, I published it on my Medium blog, I think is what it was. Now, when you Google Harbor Nanit or Nanit Harbor, it is like the first or second thing that comes up. It's just so silly. I don't know why they did it. It was a very silly thing to go through.
One of my favorite things about legal notices like that is the like chippiness between the lawyers. And there's always like a little bit of like, I'm going to get a joke over on you in the letters. Yeah, it's really funny to me. Yeah.
when we got that, my CMO, Lindsay, was like, oh no. And I was like, yes, because I'd done nothing illegal. And I knew that it just reinforces our point. It unequivocally reinforces our point. So I'm not glib, like competition is difficult. And I mentioned this briefly in a video I recorded recently. I'm actually friends with some people at competitors to Mizzen+Main. Don't get me wrong. Competition is real. I want to win. But like, I don't know, the guys that started Ministry of Supply, we've become friendly. We'll talk every couple of months. And are we directly competing? Yes. And the Venn diagram of overlap, like it's not 100%, but it's a lot, right? We both do performance clothing. It's not a zero-sum game in so much of the world of competition. Now, you're probably only going to buy one baby monitor. But ultimately, when you talk about foils in competition, if someone had already built a camera and a tablet that connect directly to each other without internet and both devices connect to the cloud, I wouldn't have started Harbor. And so part of being so blunt about the competition and why I just hammered the competition in building Mizzen+Main was basically like, if someone had done this, I wouldn't be doing it. But it's insane that no one had made a performance fabric dress shirt. There's no reason that someone shouldn't have done this already. And the reason they didn't is the innovator's dilemma. It'd be real hard for Brooks Brothers to just all of a sudden say, here's this new dress shirt. It's better in every way than a cotton dress shirt. And then still have whatever, $250 million worth of inventory in cotton dress shirts. They're just unlikely to do that, which is why startups exist. It's why innovation comes in. And it's why big companies end up buying startup competitors, because whether for reputation, innovator's dilemma, going into a new market, it's just easier to pay a premium to buy a startup.
As always, there's many topics that we could have gotten to that we didn't. Many topics we could have spent infinite more time on that we didn't. We've actually talked a lot about your vision for the future and how this company can kind of serve that. But I'm curious, maybe my closing two questions are about the beautiful future you'd like to build and then who you're becoming in doing that work. So if you look at the ties between Mizzen+Main, Stand Together, Harbor, and wherever you may go in the future, if you had to kind of summarize, like what is the most beautiful version of the future you're trying to bring to bear, what would that be?
I have learned more about what a life of meaning is since having kids than I expected. I thought I had a pretty good sense of perspective, especially relative to all the craziness that I see before I had kids. And for the first few years, some people, they just instantly get it. I have a buddy who just had a kid. She's 3 months old. And he's like, I didn't know love before my daughter was born. And I don't believe he's just saying that as a platitude. I believe he gets it. And I was certainly transformed. All of a sudden, now I'm a dad. Everything's different. But as my kids have gotten older and the nature of the time that I've spent with them continues to change, it feels life has taken on a different shape. The things that used to matter to me matter a lot less. And, it comes back to this conversation that we've hit. Like, I want Harbor to be successful. I want Mizzen+Main to be successful. And then, like, I would be really okay just deleting my social media presence entirely. I deleted Facebook years ago because it's just such a weird place. My Instagram is private. It's just for people that I know. But X and LinkedIn, it's a professional thing for me. I like learning. I get exposed to new ideas, but like I could get exposed to new ideas with anonymous accounts. That would be very easy to do.
Yeah.
I want to build a successful business and create value because there is meaning for that in me. Like creating something turns out to actually be something I feel like I'm good at and matters to me. I don't know that I'll do it a third time. Mizzen and now Harbor. I don't think I'll do it again. We'll see. But maybe the best example that I can give is getting to coach my son's little soccer team has become one of the most meaningful things that I've gotten to do since he was born. I think I missed one game last season. And when I started, the first year, these kids have been together, the same team for, I think, 4 years now and multiple seasons. And this is not a hyper competitive thing. This is YMCA.
Yeah.
But the first year, a guy who's now become a good friend, his name's Houston, was the coach. I'm always the overdo it kind of person. And so I was like, I'm going to sit up against a tree and read a book. I'm not going to say anything. If my kid's being disrespectful, I'll comment, but like, I'm not going to assistant coach my way in. And in the second season, he was like, would you help me? I was like, oh, sure. Like, I didn't want to like take your thunder. And the first 2 seasons, maybe we won 1 game. And just getting together every spring and fall with the same group of kids, same four dad coaches. Last season, we outscored our opponents like 65-12. As it turns out, we ended up with a couple ringers on the team, and it is not my coaching at all, to be 100% clear. But I say all of this, and when we talk about storytelling, one of the stories that stood out to me most from a mentor, his name's Bobby Lyle, very, very successful entrepreneur, huge philanthropist in the city of Dallas and beyond. He told me, you are very fortunate to be an entrepreneur. Now, it's very hard, but he goes, I remember I was basically at every one of my kids' practices and games. And there was a lot of other grind outside of that, and it was very hard. But to be able to do that, a lot of the lawyers that I know don't get to do that. A lot of the investment bankers that I know don't get to do that. Now, they have a much more stable income, but I can construct my life in a way that makes it so that I'm largely there. And so all the way back to long term, my wife and I being able to live a life where we love each other deeply and end up hosting holidays. Hopefully our kids live nearby, but like our kids want to come home and bring their kids home with us. The very deep relationship that we have with our kids, I actually don't see with a lot of other parents. Our kids love being with us and we love being with them. And it's a lot of work, but man, it is so much more meaningful than anything else that I've done. And the difficult summer that we had with some health issues meant I spent a lot more time with my kids this summer than I probably would have. And our relationship has grown so much deeper. It gives so much more perspective to everything else. And it's not that I want to pull away from the world and not do anything, but if this house is well looked after and the love in it is, then everything else is kind of like, it'll find a way to work itself out and I will be able to give what needs to be given. But if I've got this in a good spot, then everything else can be great.
That's a great place to leave it. Can't imagine a better message to close on. Kevin Lavelle, thanks for joining me.
Barrett, thanks for the opportunity. Great to reconnect. And I'm excited to see what you've been building. I remember you jumping into this and I knew that it wouldn't be just another podcast and you've proven that. So thanks for having me on in these early days.
Thank you. It means a lot. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Good Work. My name is Barrett Brooks. I'm your host. This podcast is produced by my friends over at Podcast Royale. If you enjoyed today's episode featuring my friend and guest, Kevin Lavelle, please make sure to hit subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else. I'd love to have you back next week and every week after to hear from future guests on the show. If you enjoyed hearing from Kevin, you can find more of his work at harbor.co for the baby monitor company, Mizzen+Main.com for the performance fabric dress shirts, and now many different types of shirts that they make at that company. And then you can find Kevin on X, Twitter, depending on what you like to call it. He's at Kevin S. Lavelle. That's LAVELLE.com. And of course, you can find all the links, as always, in the show notes at goodworkshow.com. Find every past episode, all the links, all the highlights, all the notes you could want, timestamps, all that good stuff at goodworkshow.com. So make sure to check that out. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love to run a little experiment this week. I'd love for you to share one thing that you took from the episode on social media, wherever you log on to social, whether it's Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. I would just love to know how many of you are listening, how many of you actually care and listen enough to be able to share something. It's not because it's like I'm running a contest or I need you to share something on social. I just would really appreciate it. Be awesome if you could share a takeaway. I love seeing that stuff. It means a lot to me, makes me want to keep going. And it also helps people find the show and listen to it, which is another reason for guests to want to come on and for me to keep going. So thanks for doing that. I appreciate you sharing. As always, so grateful for you to spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with me every week. That's a huge honor. It's a huge privilege. I know I don't take it lightly, and hopefully you really get something out of every episode, including today's with Kevin. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.